Okay, moving down the priority ladder, we're going to get into kind of our intermediate groups here. We did the tough ones, carboxylic acid, amides, esters. Like that. I see those. Very likely you will see these instead. These are going to be the highest priority. We're moving down. Okay, so up here we had with our last video, we had those three groups, and now we're moving down the priority list from cyanides, aldehydes, ketones, alcohols, thiols, and amines. And when competing, these are the highest priority. That's how I wrote them here. I would know, again, it's very unlikely you're going to use something like cyanide as its own functional group instead of the root, because that would mean you have something higher priority taking that, aka an amide, ester, or carboxylic acid. Very unlikely. So if you have cyanide, it's most likely going to be the root. Once you get beyond that point, it might be reasonable to maybe start seeing these things being their own functional groups. They'll turn into functional groups when something is high, when something else exists, it's higher priority. For example, if I have a ketone as one functional group and it's on a molecule, there's another functional group on that ketone. If it's a higher priority, that higher priority is the root, and our ketone becomes a functional group of which I use a prefix for. So that ketone is now an oxo group. If there's a ketone in something else that's a lower priority, our ketone's the highest priority in that molecule, it's going to become the root, and I can use "-one" to end that word, end that name. Let's go through these. I'll start with cyanide here. Or our nitrile group, excuse me. If I had a negative charge, it would be cyanide. Nitrile groups. Again, very unlikely we're going to use the prefix for this. Instead, look at this. We can just say nitrile. Isn't that nice? So we just name what we have and we put nitrile at the end. That's our highest priority in this case because it's our suffix. Because we have a nitrile here, let's go ahead and actually use this. I have two functional groups in this molecule. I have a nitrile and I have an alcohol, which is highest priority. Our nitrile, right? So our nitrile is highest priority. We'll get carbon 1, and it's also going to be the root of our name. I have one other functional group here. I have an alcohol on carbon number 3. So I'm not going to say 3-all, because that would be if it's the root. Because there's nitrile here of a higher priority group, that bumps our alcohol to just be a substituent, okay? And as a substituent, we're going to say that's a hydroxy group, a hydroxy substituent. The name of this would be 3-hydroxy nitrile. All one word, I left a space there, I shouldn't have. 3-hydroxy nitrile. All right, maybe if I had an alcohol and a functional group that was lower priority, alcohol would become my highest priority group. It would get the lowest number carbon, or carbon number 1 if it can, and become an all group at the end. Because it's highest priority, it's going to have a suffix all at the end. Nitriles are higher priority. That bumps alcohol out of that suffix position. Now it just becomes a prefix and a substituent, of which I can just say 3-hydroxy nitrile in this case, because nitrile is higher priority. Let's actually do the one right below it. I have two functional groups here. What are they? I have an alcohol group again, and I have a carboxylic acid, which is higher priority. If you watched the last video, you should know carboxylic acid is highest priority, and it will receive the lowest number of carbon it can. Carboxylic acids, aldehydes, those are always going to be number 1 because they're at terminally located, and nitrile as well. Number of my carbons, we said carboxylic acid is my highest priority, meaning I should end the word with what? Should end it with oic acid, okay? And my alcohol, I'm not going to end with ol, right? Because it's now just a substituent. this is going to be 2-hydroxy. I have 2-hydroxy indicating the alcohol group. And now I have to name the carboxylic acid. 3 carbons, what would we call that? Propanoic acid. So 2-hydroxy propanoic acid. There, we're already combining things from the first and second video and working with priority. Okay, covered nitriles, we've touched on alcohols. Let's do aldehydes and ketones. Aldehydes are going to be highest priority compared to ketones, they'll be higher priority. And they're always going to be aldehydes terminally located on our molecule. You can't have an aldehyde in the middle of your molecule if it's the highest priority group, okay? Because it would just be a ketone. So our aldehydes are going to be higher priority than ketones. And again, it's unlikely that we're going to see formal or oxo groups, maybe, but just be familiar with them. They're only going to show up if there's something higher priority that's bumping them down to just a prefix and not the root. There's got to be something higher up for these aldehydes and ketones to use these. Usually if there's an aldehyde or ketone still at this stage, they're going to be the highest priority anyway, and we're going to be using them as suffixes. Try and name this molecule up here on the top right on your own. Identify your functional groups, number the carbons based on priority, and then use suffixes and prefixes to name this. I have an aldehyde and a ketone, my functional groups. Which is higher priority? The aldehyde. So it will assume number 1 position. I've numbered my carbons. Because our aldehyde is the priority group here, highest priority, that's going to bump ketone down to a substituent. And when I do that, ketone becomes an oxo group. So I could say this is 4-oxo, and then I can name my aldehyde with the chain. I have 5 carbons, and aldehyde, that would be called pentanal. Good. So 4-oxo pentanal. And why don't we say 1-pentanal? It's because that would be repetitive. Aldehydes are always going to be at the end. Okay, so we don't need to say 1-pentanal, we can just say pentanal. 4-oxo, my ketone group, pentanal. If I just had a ketone, its highest priority, say in this molecule here, it's in the 2 position. This, for example, would be 2-propanone. I'm not going to use oxo because it's not bumped down to a substituent of any kind. It's the priority group. It's the highest priority group. I can make it the root. So when I use a root for ketone, I'm going to use -one, 2 position, 2-propanone. Alcohols, I think we're pretty good with, okay? If it's the highest priority, if there's nothing else that's bumping it down, we're going to end it with ol. And as we've seen here, if there are higher priority groups present above an alcohol, they become hydroxy groups. Unlikely that you'll see thiols, okay, sulfur. Very unlikely. Just in case, here you go, just in case. If it's the root, it's thiol, and if it's a substituent, it's mercapto. Probably something to do with Latin or what they used to call it a long time ago on the periodic table and change it to, maybe. Not too important, thiols. Be familiar with them. No thiol for sure. Definitely not the mercapto group, that's not going to show up. Last, we do amines. And what's really nice about our nitrogen-containing groups, if you notice, amide, we end with amide. Nitriles, we end with nitriles. Amines, we end with amines. That's nice about them. And if we use them as a substituent, then they're called amino groups. So I have one example here. I have an amine because it's the highest priority on this molecule, it's going to be an amine suffix, not an amino prefix. And I can just name my chain that way. So I could number my carbons if I want, and I would number them this way. That way my amine assumes the lowest position. And then I just have 1, 2, 3 carbons. That would be a propyl group, propylamine. Yeah, and I screwed that one up. I'm probably going to edit the video to cut out that, crap. Well, I screwed that one up. We'll get to that. I just saw that. Anyway. Oh. Propylamine. Propylamine. There we go. Okay, what did I mess up here? I didn't say how many carbons I had. I just said 3-hydroxynitrile. I forgot how many carbons. So that's probably why that space is there, to be honest. Let's try this one again. Hopefully you're still watching. I'll start from the beginning. I have 2 functional groups. Which one's highest priority? My nitrile group is higher than alcohol, so it will have the suffix. Our alcohol will become a prefix of 3-hydroxy. I have how many? I have 4 carbons. I'm going to end with nitrile. This is 3-hydroxy butane nitrile. I don't say butyl nitrile. I don't know why. But again, it's not going to come down to the case of 3-hydroxy butyl nitrile and 3-hydroxy butane nitrile. They're not going to distinguish on that. What they would likely do in this case, a multiple choice, they might call this 2-hydroxy butane nitrile. And that would not be the case because we should count carbons from left to right to prioritize our nitrile group. They might call this 3-hydroxy butylamine. Maybe they call this an amine group for some reason. We can eliminate that choice. Or maybe they say this is, they might say that this is 4-cyano-2-butanol. That would be if they prioritize the alcohol over the nitrile. So those are what your multiple choices are going to look like. They're going to get the numbers wrong, they're going to get the substituents wrong, they're going to get the priority wrong, and then they're going to give you the right answer. You're not going to distinguish between butyl and butane, for example. But numbering functional groups and priority, they might screw up on A, B, C. Correct answer D, if I can even do it right, 3-hydroxybutane nitrile. Okay, those are intermediate groups. We'll get more practice with those, especially during that study night next week, next Monday at 6. It's going to be somewhere up here in UHB, if you can make it. So I think I included everyone in that, and I tried to choose a day that would work best from the poll I sent out. I just used the email I've been using before, so if you're not in there for some reason, just let me know. And we'll do one more video with our lowest priority groups. Those that will only just be, I believe, prefixes. There won't be any root involved with them, as well as alkenes and alkynes. So, hope that helped. Apologies for kind of screwing up that last one. But I think I liked what I said about the multiple choice. They're going to screw up the numbers, so we should be comfortable with that. They're going to screw up the functional groups, and they're going to screw up the priority. So watching these videos, getting practice, trying them on your own, being familiar with it, not being experts at it. You don't need to be for multiple choice. Being familiar with it is all we're asking for, and it's how I think you will do well on the ACS.